Thank you. Okay. Mona, would you like to ask a question, and where are you from?
I'm from Savannah, Georgia, and thank you all for this informative information. I'm just concerned. My first question, I have like a two-part question. It's the EWG. Is that the best source for finding products that are not contaminated with anything? And my second part is, if you can't do full-on organic, is non-GMO an option? Those are my questions.
That was a great question. I think we all want to jump on this one. So the EWG just does fruits and vegetables. They don't do grains and beans and things like that. They also haven't put much attention on GMOs and also on Roundup, because they take US government statistics, and the US government tests the residues of all these different herbicides, except Roundup, because their friends in Monsanto said it's so safe you don't even have to test it. So what they put out is not necessarily glyphosate related, and some of their clean 15, like corn and papaya on there, could be GMOs. So it's partial knowledge, and partial knowledge is a dangerous thing. Organic does not allow the use of GMOs or Roundup, and also all these other chemicals. So we're like organic fanatics. Now, if you can't eat, I'm going to just first of all say non-GMO Project is the best third-party verification to make sure things don't have GMOs in them, but they don't pay attention to the Roundup. So if you have a non-GMO Project verified oatmeal, well, oats are never genetically engineered, but they're often soaked in Roundup. So you want the organic version. So the way we do it is organic, I think, is the best. And if you happen to have something that says organic and the non-GMO Project verified seal, that's actually a gold standard, because you don't have to test for contamination of GMOs in organic. But if you have the non-GMO Project and you have any at-risk ingredients, then you do require testing. So that's like an extra gold seal. Now, if you can't get organic, at least get non-GMO and avoid those products that have high levels of glyphosate. Now, at responsibletechnology.org, we have everyone's data. Anyone that's tested for glyphosate in foods in North America, we throw that in there with their results. And I want to thank Zen, Moms Across America, is the pioneer. You are amazing activists. You have incredible ideas, and you really are amazing asset to the planet. So thank you. And we've stolen all of your data and put all of your data into our database, along with the stuff that happens everywhere else.
The more the merrier that happens.
I know, you're very generous. So you want to read the database and find out what has high levels of glyphosate. Zen mentioned some of those things. And so if you can't eat organic, don't eat the oats or the wheat or the lentils or the mung beans that are not organic, because you'll just drink, or the chickpeas, you like the hummus. So you'll have to sort of figure out how to deal with it. Organic is easier. And the other thing I have to add is this. When you have to eat a GMO or something that's sprayed with glyphosate, I'm going to say something that sounds radical. Don't worry about it. Just don't worry about it. Because worrying is toxic, and the GMO is toxic, and the Roundup is toxic. So don't add another toxin. If you have to deal with it, and we're not going to avoid it completely, it's in the air, it's in the rain, just enjoy the food and love yourself and love the people you're with. And don't sit there with this worry that, oh my God, I'm going to get this and I'm going to get this. No, that just makes the effect of the food worse. So have that mental and emotional discipline that if you're going to eat it, love it, enjoy it, bless it. And then when you have more control over your food, do the best you can.
Great point, Jeffrey. I'd just like to add, and I'm sure Stacy would too, but I really like made safe for products that have been screened. If you're talking body care products, household products, things like that. And I second everything Jeffrey said about the foods and labeling. Biodynamic is also wonderful. Demeter and Regenerative Ag, Regenerative Organic Certification, ROC. The Real Organic Project is also good. I do have to say, though, that my only concern about some of these is that organic foods have been found to have high levels of heavy metals, like baby foods. and even higher levels than some conventional foods. We can't just skip over that fact. So that's why we do advocate for daily detoxing. Things like Moms Across America, we have a product called Primary Detox on our website. It's a Chinese herbal product, and it's kind of sweet and it tastes good. And, things like that. You can do bentonite clays. You could do activated, charcoal. There's many, many different types of detox products that you could get, but please do seek the advice of a doctor, because you don't want to detox certain parts of your body and not have other pathways open and all that stuff. So I just would suggest a consistent detoxing. One that's really easy for aluminum is just drinking Fiji water. It has silica in it. And my father had 246 parts per billion of aluminum in his body after a DTaP vaccine and a flu zone shot. And it eventually did kill him. It damaged his internal organs. But after a year of drinking Fiji water, his levels went down to a 6 of aluminum, and his brain capacity comprehension was improved. So there are things that you can do. Organic can still have high levels of heavy metals, so continue to detox regularly.
They also asked if they can't do organic, is non-GMO an option?
Well, it's better than GMO or conventional food. Yeah. But, and I also want to point out that non-GMO does not mean no glyphosate, as Jeffrey said. So non-GMO just means tested for GMOs. It does not mean that glyphosate has not been used on the product. And the detox project, unfortunately, fortunately, but they did expose protein powders. If you want to avoid contamination of organic, it's the highly processed food. The protein powders had the same levels: GMO, conventional protein powder, a non-GMO protein powder, and an organic protein powder. Some of those particular brands had the same levels, 54 parts per billion of glyphosate in all of them. What does that mean? That means that organic and non-GMO was not just contaminated. It means that was fraudulent labeling. So those soybeans that came from Turkey, which, by the way, 80% of the soy that's used in American organic products comes from overseas. And about 80%, maybe 60 to 80% of the soy that we grow, we export. So we're importing products, right? Doesn't make sense to me. And we're importing. And so these soybeans come over from Turkey and they land in the port in Los Angeles or Long Beach, and they go from conventional to all of a sudden they're organic and worth $2 million more per container. So then those soybeans go into our protein powders and protein bars and cookies and pastas and things like that are supposed to be organic, and they're actually fraudulently labeled organic. So unfortunately, there is contamination going on. That doesn't mean that all organic is contaminated. I'm just saying, if you want to avoid contaminated organic, avoid the processed foods first, and continue to support organizations like Moms Across America who can test. When we get funding, we test foods and we can expose the things that our federal government is not exposing, which is, regulation of the food supply.
Ooh,
I'd like to chime in here on the testing, because the United States, as she just mentioned, I think we only tested in 1 year, and I think it was like 2011 or 2012 for soybeans, 300 samples of soybean. Our government, that's the only time I'm aware of that they actually tested, and they found glyphosate or its breakdown product AMPA in 96% of the samples that they tested. And Canada has really done a lot better, and that's because of my friend Tony Mitra, who is Indian descent, but he's a Canadian citizen. He tirelessly harassed the Canadian government to finally get them to test. And they tested over 8,000 samples of Canadian foods imported from the US, from Europe, from Mexico. And then he produced a book called Poison Foods of North America as a consequence of that data. And the book's a dry read, but it's got a lot of data in there. So if you want to know which foods had high levels, you can look at that book. They had, surprisingly, perhaps, they found the highest levels overall consistently in legumes, mung beans and garbanzo beans, chickpeas, hummus. Legumes, non-organic, non-GMO legumes had pretty much the highest levels among the different foods they tested. And that's because they're sprayed right before harvest. And the same is true for the oats and the barley and the wheat. And I think that's why we have a gluten intolerance epidemic, is because of the glyphosate on the wheat. So these are all non-GMO products. So what I'm saying is, it's not really, in my opinion, that much better to go non-GMO with respect to glyphosate. You're not necessarily going to get any less. You might even get more. if you're switching to non-GMO products that are sprayed right before harvest, because they come up with higher levels than the GMO products in many cases.
And if you're switching to vegan and vegetarian foods, but they're not organic, you are consuming the highest levels of glyphosate of any diet out there. It's very important for vegans and vegetarians to eat organic.
That's very, very important. And I also want to add with Tony Mitra's data is that they found consistently the highest levels overall in foods imported from the United States or foods grown in Canada compared to any country in Europe and compared to Mexico. Mexico came in more or less in line with Europe. So that's quite interesting that Mexico uses less glyphosate overall than we do. And Mexico is actually planning to ban glyphosate completely, I believe next year, starting next year or very soon.
And Mexico's levels were like 40 to 70% lower than other countries of glyphosate residues. And China's even were lower than ours. So yeah, very, very disturbing how contaminated our food supply is.
Okay. Ua, would you like to ask a question, and where are you from?
Good evening. I am from London. I have a few questions. One, I would like request for comment specialist. Last time my situation was changed and I started to eating only pasta with semolina with garlic. When I was eating 1 time per day this meal, I didn't feel muscle pain. But when I eat it as well bread and sandwiches made from full wheat, I felt really muscle pain. I would like to say that pasta is made only from 1 part of meat, semolina, and bread is made from full wheat. This is one question. Second question, I would like as well, please, for comment about soybeans. Years ago, I researched from lady who long time was engaged in organic farming, that she find out that mothers who start to feed children vegetarian diet with soybeans mainly, start to born and in pregnancy, of course, start to born disabled children. And she was not speaking about glyphosate and like this, only she said that even soybean organic have this ability. I see plenty of food here in London where I am, that meat is replaced for soybeans. And this is scary for me because I remember what this lady was speaking about soybeans. And last one is about...
Just 2 is good. Go ahead. That's it.
Okay.
Jeffrey, do you want to comment on that?
I don't actually know the difference between the glyphosate content or the gluten content between the types of, the pasta, semolina, and the bread. So I can't speak to that. There's a lot of comments about whether soy is an estrogen mimicker or whatnot, and I've read so many things on both sides, and it's not my area, so I'm also not going to comment on that. But where I am going to comment is that with the GMO soy, you mentioned, Iwa, that the person gave birth to disabled children. There is a lot of correlation, Stephanie mentioned this earlier, between glyphosate exposure and birth defects. And in Argentina, they spray glyphosate by planes over vast areas of Roundup Ready soybeans. In the areas where they're spraying, the amount of birth defects went up 400% and cancer up 300%. But in one hospital, which was where in a very concentrated area of spraying, the amount of birth defects went up 71 times. And there was a Dr. Carrasco in Argentina that injected Roundup into fetuses, a chicken and a frog, I believe, and found that the offspring had the same type of birth defects as the people who were being sprayed by plane and other ways, same type of birth defects, and actually found the metabolic pathway that was creating these type of birth defects. So that was the Roundup Ready soy sprayed with Roundup, and that's what I can speak to.
And I can add to that those experiments were based on retinoic acid, which is vitamin A, and glyphosate actually disrupts the ability to break down vitamin A. And when you have, it's very important in development. It needs to be expressed. It does its thing, and then it gets out. But the getting out part doesn't happen because the enzyme's broken, and so you get overexpression of retinoic acid, which then causes these severe birth defects. And I think that's because of an enzyme. It makes sense to me because I know which enzymes glyphosate disrupts, and they would definitely disrupt the ability to detox, to break down the vitamin A, and mess up those critical timing issues. I also remember a film about children in, I think it was also Argentina, and it was growing tobacco. It was a place where they grew GMO Roundup Ready tobacco. And the company that they sold to required that they use the GMO and they use the glyphosate, or else they would not buy the product. And these kids, and then they showed various children who were severely disabled in that community as a consequence of the exposure to those chemicals. So it's really very serious consequences for kids living in communities where glyphosate is being sprayed. I think that's really tragic.
And as far as the grains on the wheat go, I know from Tony Matra's testing, he showed that the whole wheat where the glyphosate was sprayed on the whole and the husk was still on, those had much higher levels. That type of grains had much higher levels of glyphosate versus the white bread, which we typically think to be less healthy because it's so processed, but it doesn't have as much glyphosate on it. So perhaps that's what was going on when the difference between the pasta and the bread, some were whole grain and some were not. And some would have higher levels of glyphosate. And we're talking like, I mean, what they allow is like 30,000 parts per billion. It's 30 parts per million. And what has been shown to cause like gut disruption and all that's like 0.0